Hello everyone. Welcome to Postcard Buddhism. Today, we will talk about the topic, the supreme and most happy in Buddhism. In this episode, we will explore the profound teachings and insights that define the ultimate happiness and supreme state according to Buddhist philosophy. Join us as we delve into the conversations and wisdom that illuminate the path to true contentment and spiritual fulfillment. The supreme and most blissful in Buddhism. The main topics of this content are the supreme and the most blissful aspects. The sutra revolves around a dialogue between two spiritual leaders, the Buddha, the spiritual teacher of the path of enlightenment, and the ascetic Upadesi, a spiritual practitioner from the ascetic tradition. This dialogue takes place in the presence of all the followers of the ascetic Upadesi. Through the dialogue, the Buddha established that a person deemed to have universal knowledge, meaning possessing omniscient knowledge both while awake and asleep, as popularly exalted and idolized, does not measure up to even 1/10 of the value of a person who understands the principles of cause and effect and dependent origination. The second content delves into the differing viewpoints between Buddhism and the ascetic tradition on the path leading to the highest happiness. The ascetics believe that the path to the highest happiness is the cessation of all unethical behaviors, essentially asserting that the moral path is the path to happiness. In contrast, the Buddha asserts that while the moral path is a very important foundational beginning, it is not the entirety of the path to happiness. Therefore, spiritual practitioners, besides fulfilling their personal moral values, must also complete the values of meditation. These are the two fundamental points raised in this sutra. From Sutra number 75 onward, we notice a consistency in introducing the content through dialogues. Notably, the heated debates on worldly matters abruptly pause when the Buddha is present, marking the commencement of a dialogue between the Buddha and the ascetics. This indirectly shows us that the non-Buddhist ascetics following the ascetic tradition have a considerable respect for religious matters. What they have learned from their tradition and what they hear rumored from the spiritual tradition of Buddhism share similarities but also have differences. However, when given the opportunity to encounter these differences, they open their minds comfortably, without prejudice against what is different from their own beliefs. It can be said that the ascetic movement, including Buddhism, is genuinely a free and democratic movement in terms of spirituality. The origin of the ascetic movement is a resistance in epistemology and religion, refusing to acknowledge all the established truths proclaimed in the Vedic scriptures, breaking away from the Vedic tradition which heavily emphasized caste issues and all social institutions revolving around this caste system. The ascetics became truly free individuals, liberal and striving to find a new spiritual path to fill the gaps in the spiritual path of Brahmanism in general. Thanks to the attitude of dissatisfaction and discontent with the existing religious institutions, most people following the ascetic path learned and absorbed this liberal spirit. This is the starting point of the spiritual path. When approaching the spiritual path merely through belief, the value achieved is only those institutions. The truthfulness or falsity of its value depends entirely on these institutions. Approaching through the lens of belief, if these institutions are aligned with ethics and spirituality, our devotion through the lens of belief will open up a positive direction. Otherwise, we will accumulate more religious notions that deep involvement in them may bind us, losing true happiness. The Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, was one of these ascetics. His spiritual path was entirely different in that he had experienced all that was considered and rumored. When he himself was part of experiencing that spiritual quality and substance, he realized that its true value was completely different from the rumors. Departing from the ascetic tradition, he began his own way, seeking the middle path, transcending all attachments to the hedonistic ideology that could lead people deeper into degradation, and the ascetic path that could make people sick, achieving a calm mind but lacking wisdom and clarity. Through such engagement, he clearly saw the limitations of this new spiritual path of the ascetics. Despite its contribution of resistance on the spirit of freedom and democracy about what should not be and what is not worth believing in, regardless of its deep-rooted cultural tradition of thousands of years. This is one of the important premises that opened the innovation and renewal. The Buddhist spiritual path encourages the exploration of spiritual values rather than passively inheriting them by accepting everything unconditionally. Unconditional belief still has value in establishing quick practice into the teachings, leading to immediate mental peace. However, with unconditional belief, the arising of wisdom as a path to resolving impasses is a completely different issue, requiring intellectual verification to see if it truly brings long-term peace. Fortunately and successfully, the Buddha created a new measure for the spiritual path. When he was present, the ongoing heated debates became absolutely silent and solemn. In previous sutras, the ascetics only encountered his disciples such as Sariputta, Moggallana, Ananda, or occasionally met lay Buddhist practitioners. This was a rare opportunity, face-to-face with the Tathagata, whose spiritual values had been rumored and questioned whether those rumors were true or just empty propaganda. Therefore, to ensure the content was confirmed, the ascetic Upadhyasi instructed all his disciples and lay followers present at that time to maintain solemnity and absolute silence, as this was the principle of the Buddha. If the environment was not peaceful, the dialogue would not take place. Following the advice, everyone focused their minds on the Buddha. No omniscience at all times. The first question that the ascetic Upadhyasi posed to the Buddha was, "Lord, I am very puzzled and doubtful about the claims of omniscience by Nigantha Nātaputta, who asserts that he possesses unbroken, continuous knowledge, whether walking, standing, sleeping, or waking. Yet when I asked him about the past, he avoided the question, responded irrelevantly, and displayed anger and resentment." Nigantha Nātaputta, known in Vietnamese as Ni Kien Tu, was the founder of Jainism. He is understood to have attained enlightenment 6 years before the Buddha and lived contemporaneously with him for several years. This dialogue is indirect. Instead of directly questioning the Buddha, Upadhyasi refers to another spiritual teacher. This is a spiritual trap. If at that moment the Buddha had criticized or attacked Nigantha Nātaputta, it would have confirmed the suspicion that the Buddha's reputation was baseless. The essence of an enlightened being, even when seeing the limitations of others, is not to nitpick or attack when provoked, but to present issues constructively and with a focus on higher objectives. The spiritual discussions about the truth and rumors were common among the ascetics of the Shramana tradition whenever they had the opportunity to meet in remote forests or mountains, and they were often left unsatisfied. Being freethinkers, Shramanas liked to travel, and whenever they heard of a spiritual master of significant stature, they would approach him to seek new values for themselves. Some pursuits led to satisfaction, while others resulted in profound disappointment. The trap set here is profound, and the Buddha's response is equally profound. He said, "The answer to the question raised can only be satisfying if the dialogue occurs between two individuals who possess the knowledge of past lives and insight into the cycle of birth and death. Otherwise, it becomes meaningless." In the spiritual tradition of Buddhism, Tukman Men refers to the ability to recall past lives, not just the immediate past, but stretching back across an immeasurable span of time. This includes detailed recollection of one's name, family, marriage, social status, happiness, suffering, wealth or poverty, and various interactions in each life. Tianyanmen, on the other hand, is understood as the ability to see clearly the causal relationships of people's actions from the present connecting to the future. Actions taken in the present, A, result in specific outcomes, A plus or A, which can sometimes neutralize and become neutral or balanced reactions. This mechanism of karma, considered as individual karma and collective karma of a community, nation, or country, is clearly perceived by those who possess Tianyanmen. If the dialogue does not take place with such individuals, how can the listener verify the accuracy of what is presented? Thus, the Buddha's point was that it would be futile to focus on whether the omniscience of Nigantha Nātaputta is genuine or merely an empty claim. Moreover, discussions in the absence of the third party become meaningless and might be seen as slander or criticism without giving the person a chance to defend themselves. Hence, the Buddha's response skillfully avoided the debate trap set by the ascetic Upadhyasi. The present is a miracle, Afterward, the Buddha steered the conversation towards a very practical direction. The most important thing I want to share with you is to forget the past and also to forget the future, and remember that we are living in the present. When anyone brings up past events, it means we are discussing the past. The value of the past exists in its own time, with those directly or indirectly related to it, while we are discussing something that involves neither the first person nor the second person. Thus, what value does it have? And mentioning the future, which is inherently uncertain due to the chain of mental perceptions leading to actions, is also not reliable. Therefore, the Buddha redirected Upadesi from debating about a past event or person to directly facing him. The central content of the conversation here must revolve around such issues. Here, we can learn and apply this. Often when having a conversation, we don't discuss the matters between the two of us, but talk about others. The more we talk about a third person, the more likely it leads to dissatisfaction between the two present, potentially turning friendship or kinship into conflict or opposition. Hence, focusing on the reality as it is crucial to resolve issues. In other words, the focus of the conversation, as suggested by the Buddha, should be on the reality of as it is, and the method of dialogue should be talking with rather than talking about. We speak with someone who is listening and vice versa. This ensures that the conversation feels serious, unlike talking about another person. The nature of an event from the past or future cannot provide nourishment for the mind or practical value for the two people. Therefore, in family life, whether between spouses, children, siblings, or relatives, we should follow the Buddha's method. If someone brings a troublesome story from the office to our attention, a Buddhist should know how to steer the discussion back to what is happening now. Instead of worrying about others' children, we should focus on our own. Instead of discussing strangers, we should discuss matters between the two of us. Instead of citing irrelevant matters, we should bring up our current concerns to find solutions. This way, the quality of family life will improve significantly. By following the Buddha's example, we should aim to bring discussions back to the present reality among those present, rather than those absent. Because the truth regarding the absent cannot be verified, and going into deep detail becomes pointless. Stopping the past and future is very important. Historians and archaeologists strive to pull us back to the past to help us cultivate knowledge about culture and customs. This knowledge becomes valuable experience if used correctly. Its significance lies in providing insight, provided it is analyzed methodically to create historical lessons rather than merely presenting common historical events and guessing their subsequent reactions. Thus, studying history is to draw lessons, avoid repeating mistakes, and serve oneself in the present or future to not become a similar victim. From a Buddhist perspective, the value of history, including archaeology and similar fields, lies here. In this context, Upadeshi's discussion veered towards dissatisfaction and disappointment due to the rumored omniscient abilities of the great spiritual teacher Nigantha. However, through his questioning, we see that verifying someone's omniscience depends on whether they can demonstrate perfect knowledge of the past and future with evidence. If the answer is no, then the rumor is merely a rumor and could lead to idolatry, personal superstition, and blind faith prevalent in many theistic, monotheistic, or polytheistic religions. Claiming an omniscient personality based on infallibility, knowing everything accurately in life, is easy to declare but hard to confirm. Upadesi refers to the past, not just a few decades ago but past lives, and Nigantha inability to answer shows his lack of this power, leading him to evade. When it comes to the process of reincarnation, his inability is also evident. Similarly, this applies to those claiming to be prophets. When asked about any specific event, especially related to themselves, if they cannot answer, then claims like, "I can know about others and events 1,000 years ahead," lack logical basis. This is the fundamental measure to assess the depth of someone labeled as omniscient. Religions often exalt and exaggerate the omniscient powers of their founders. But realistically, analyzing the events described in their scriptures, the two factors of past and future do not support the belief that the character possesses such a personality. Thus, when hearing claims of such powers, we only need to consider the past and future to verify their authenticity, or if it is just a cover for another purpose. Therefore, in the scriptures, the Buddha advised monks, even if they possess such abilities, not to display them unless for educational purposes, to help people believe in cause and effect and guide them towards the righteous path. Exhibiting extraordinary talents to attract followers and alienate others is forbidden. Violating this rule is blameworthy. Therefore, anyone claiming to be a saint, possessing supernatural powers, extraordinary talents, should be recognized as going against the spirit of Buddhism. Buddhism teaches to practice more than to speak. Minimizing the use of miracles is crucial as it leads to personal idolatry and high superstition. Education is a miracle. The Buddha introduced a new concept based on wordplay. Educational miracles are considered the most valuable educational method that all educators and Buddhist preachers should practice. Educational miracles do not mean using one's supernatural powers to draw others into believing in supernatural, extraordinary abilities. Education, in this sense, is the ability to use methods to clearly see a person's strengths, weaknesses, dispositions, troubles, and potential to solve those troubles. By understanding the psychology and personality of that person, guiding them back to Buddhism can be highly effective. Those who can perform such educational work are considered to be performing miracles. In other words, the act of educating itself is a miracle. Transforming people from negative to positive, from suffering to happiness, from decline to vitality is a miracle. This type of education requires many different skills. Some people may achieve educational efficiency in a few days or months, but for others, it might take a lifetime to transform their subjects. Thus, education, especially moral and spiritual education, is a miracle. Therefore, Buddhist practitioners with the ability to perform the 6 supernatural powers rarely use them. In the Buddhist tradition, only Moggallana used his supernatural powers in very rare situations. Despite having the greatest supernatural abilities, surpassing many Brahmin spiritual leaders, he preferred teaching the Dharma to help people return to meaningful principles. This is something we need to consider. It may be arduous, but the value of successful transformation is long-lasting. Buddhist followers, however, often prefer the mystical or miraculous. They flock to places rumored to have miracles, like the belief that Lady Shu in Chodok can bestow peace and prosperity. Originally, there was only one annual day dedicated to Lady Shu, which later extended to a week, and now there are half-year-long seasons. Some temples even have names like Chodok 2 and Chodok 3 to offer equivalent value closer to home. This preference for supernatural aid reflects a reluctance to make efforts, desiring great results with little effort, hence the attraction to places promising much, rather than places speaking of cause and effect. Another understandable reason is that many people have exerted their utmost efforts without success, facing great pain and failure, leading to a loss of confidence in their abilities. Therefore, they are drawn to places rumored to offer miraculous aid. The miracle in Buddhism is the law of cause and effect. The ability to understand and live with cause and effect methodically, without falling into fatalism, randomness, blame, or complaints about heaven and earth, is the Buddhist method for resolving issues on a humanistic basis. The Buddha brought Upadasi back to the present and asked him to address current problems. The Buddha continued, "Upadasi, what I want to share with you is the doctrine of interconnection. The relationship is seen as a dialectic between objects, events, people, the environment, and animals with each other. If this exists, it creates a premise for the existence of something else. If this does not exist, it creates a premise for the absence of something else. Cause and effect are multidimensional, like spatial geometry, rather than merely linear. Linear cause and effect is naive, serving only to promote morality in a simplistic way. Killing a chicken means being reborn as a chicken and being killed, or stealing from others means being stolen from in this or the next life. Thinking this way undermines the concept of cause and effect. An analogy in the Samyutta Nikaya has deeper implications worth considering. The Buddha said, "If a prince and a commoner break the law, who will be punished more severely?" Clearly, the prince's crime might be covered up, dealt with internally, or even ignored, while the commoner's crime will be exposed and severely punished, possibly implicating their entire family. This makes people doubt the fairness of cause and effect. The Buddha further analyzed that individual merits tied to one's role and social status affect how they are treated. Therefore, co-offenders may face different punishments based on their merits. Societies not governed by rule of law but by favoritism will encourage more legal violations. When protections are gone, those individuals are often sacrificed in political purges. Hence, the connection of cause and effect should be understood as multidimensional. Good fortune can mitigate the consequences of bad actions, just as history of good deeds can lead to leniency. This merit can offset the negative actions we perform in the present. Such cause and effect are multidimensional, akin to spatial geometry. Indeed, the interaction of one thing leading to another is multidimensional and interactive. 26 centuries ago, such declarations were groundbreaking, as people believed that everything was predetermined by God or Brahma. In contrast, the Buddha explained it as a multidimensional interaction of objects, events, people, environment, and life, creating inevitable outcomes within themselves. No deity oversees and judges our actions, thoughts, and words, assigning us to specific rebirths. The Buddha said that this multidimensional interaction creates the effects we see. He refuted the idea that gods or deities control our destiny and emphasized that understanding this can free us from superstitions and unrealistic expectations about supernatural interventions. Dependent origination and interaction. The multidimensional interaction of cause and effect creates everything in life in a miraculous way, sometimes leading us to think that a supernatural hand must be at work. The question arises, if such supernatural power exists, who created it? There is no answer, leading to a dead end. Supernatural implies being uncreated and independent of causes. What is uncreated cannot be destroyed, meaning we create an absolute truth as the first cause of everything, which we consider inviolable and unquestionable. Such a response silences any debate. In reality, truth does not allow for such unquestioning acceptance. It permits us to trace origins through the formula of dependent origination. This exists because that exists. This arises because that arises. The rule of consequence is multidimensional interaction, meaning there is no single first cause. There are multiple causes: primary, secondary, direct, and indirect. This fundamental difference is what the Buddha wanted Upadasi and his followers to understand. Although the Sanas resisted the deterministic spirit of Brahmanism, they struggled to find satisfactory answers for causality and the perplexing differences in human conditions. They negated what they couldn't accept but failed to provide a more convincing alternative, leading to their impasse. The Buddha redirected Upadasi to focus on these foundational issues rather than debating past events or speculating about future scenarios that hold no practical value for the spiritual path toward happiness and peace. Upadasi confessed, "Master, I can hardly remember the generalities, let alone the details of yesterday, much less the events of one or multiple past lives. Thus, when you speak of the multi-dimensional interactive nature of causality, I find myself even more confused." This is a sincere and intellectually honest admission. Spiritual leaders are often adorned by followers with an aura of sanctity and deified in various ways, but here we see Upadasi's integrity. He does not want to accept the accolades bestowed upon him because they do not bring him peace or happiness. He wishes to live in the present, as invited by the Buddha, to forget the past and future. To engage in a dialogue about spirituality, ethics, happiness, and peace, and how to achieve them, they both delve into the present moment together. The willingness to shed the embellished aura and admit one's confusion opens the door for wisdom to arise. In dialogue, the correctness or victory is not as important as the opportunity to access or discover new truths. Upadasi exemplifies such a character, free from pride or sensitivity to perceived slights. Such attitudes would lead to the self-destruction of conscience and intellect. Thus, he admits that the issue raised by the Buddha is beyond his understanding and seeks to learn more from the Buddha on this topic. Between omniscience and dependent origination, it is clear that dependent origination holds more significance. Omniscience, as rumored, is tied to reverence and veneration imposed by others, offering no benefit to oneself. Even if true omniscience existed, the Buddha did not advise following it as a charlatan would. Those with deep spiritual insight do not need to boast. Their presence alone conveys their depth. Understanding dependent origination and the multidimensional nature of causality helps us resolve many personal, familial, communal, and global issues, even those spanning past, present, and future lives. Hence, understanding causality should be based on the present. The present should be the pivot, not the past. Today, many prosper by exploiting the past, with many professions rooted in it. For example, auctioning Picasso's paintings can make millions of dollars, even though Picasso himself lived in poverty, unappreciated during his life. After his death, his works were deified, and owning one is seen as a mark of intellectual sophistication. Although we do not deny the value of pioneering an impressive art style, it should not be exaggerated to the point where millions are spent on a single painting, while millions of people starve and suffer. Displaying such art for admiration reflects a valuation of past intellectual achievements. In contrast, the presence of the Buddha, as described in the scriptures, brought happiness to many, demonstrating practical, widespread value. Acknowledging our limitations and weaknesses allows us to develop strengths, whether in the present or the future. With the right methods and time. What is supreme? After analyzing the doctrine of dependent origination, the Buddha redirected the conversation to help Upadasi recognize the need to update his potential for wisdom. Otherwise, he would remain stuck in his current state. The Buddha asked, "Did your master teach you what is supreme in life? And if so, what is that object?" Upadasi replied, "My master says that form is supreme. When nothing else is supreme, it is supreme." Upadasi left it at that without further explanation. We can see that sometimes definitions can fall into a circular trap. A definition should add new understanding between the subject and the term, but often the terms are just synonymous, such as defining good as not bad and not bad as good, without providing any deeper insight. Many religions, philosophies, and even political ideologies offer attractive products, but their content can be empty. When asked to define the essence of these attractive products, people often avoid direct answers. They use appealing words to captivate the masses, while the actual content is inconsequential. The phrase, "you get what you pay for," is such an appealing term. A product's value is inflated tenfold, and the money spent must match this inflated value, even if the real value is much lower. The wealthy like to show off, so instead of a product worth $10,000, they will pay $100,000 and say, "You get what you pay for," ultimately being deceived. Understanding this issue helps us avoid chasing after mere appearances and names. In the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha declares a profound statement: all forms are illusory. This means all appearances, names, and even the flattering words about these forms are illusory, lacking real substance and value. However, society often values these forms, with 50 to 70% of a product's cost going to advertising, while its real value is only about 10%. Following the principle of appearances leads to money lost, trouble gained. We need concrete measures of value to discern whether something is real or just an empty declaration. Upadasi could not define what the supreme form was, so when asked further, he said that if nothing else was supreme, then that form was supreme. This creates a linguistic maze, trapping the interlocutor with no way out. Using undefined terms creates a cycle of confusion, forcing us to accept something that isn't clearly defined. In philosophical logic, such circular reasoning is forbidden because it leads nowhere. When we say that every religion teaches people to avoid evil and do good, the important issue is not the term "avoid evil and do good," but the content within this concept. If avoiding evil means simply not doing bad deeds, and doing good is merely not doing evil, then this concept is too shallow and lacks depth. We should not equate similar concepts in form and accept them as the same in content. The Vietnamese saying, "Sugarcane has bad segments, but the whole stalk is still sweet. A house may have leaks, but it's still a shelter," opposes this view. We shouldn't discard the entire cane because of a few bad segments, nor abandon the house due to a few leaks. Generalizing from a single instance to a universal rule is a methodological error to avoid. The Buddha gently said to Upadasi, "What you have just explained is meaningless. It does not help anyone understand." It is like saying, I am passionately in love with a beautiful woman, but when asked what makes her beautiful, whether it's her appearance, personality, or social role, you cannot answer. Saying someone is beautiful and that you love her without knowing anything about her is shallow. Such definitions do not lead us anywhere and show a superficial approach to understanding a person or issue. Idolizing someone without understanding the substance turns beliefs into blind faith, adding no value to real life. Upadasi used an analogy to prove that defining the supreme form as color, but his analogy backfired. The Buddha often said, "The wise understand through examples and comparisons," but Upadasi's analogy was counterproductive. The Buddha asked, "What is more brilliant, the color of a firefly or a jewel?" Upadasi said, "Of course, the jewel is more brilliant." The Buddha continued comparing different levels of brightness, leading Upadasi to acknowledge the superiority of each brighter object. Eventually, the comparison led to the sun at its zenith being the brightest. Then the Buddha compared the brightness of the sun to the light of human wisdom, asking which is brighter. Upadasi had no answer. In the context of the sutra, the Buddha used the term deva, which means shining ones. The caste system in India valued skin color, equating fair skin with wisdom and dark skin with inferiority, relegating darker-skinned people to menial labor. Instead of understanding this literally, the Buddha used it symbolically, defining brilliance as wisdom. Human wisdom shines boundlessly, unrestricted by time. A wise person illuminates their life and those around them, inviting others to share in the spiritual value. Thus, according to the Buddha, wisdom is supreme. It resolves all obstacles. A wise person, regardless of wealth, brings benefit and happiness through their actions, words, thoughts, and interactions. The essence of happiness. 5 ethical principles lead to happiness according to the Buddhist teachings and the viewpoint of asceticism. After Upadasi fell silent, unable to answer the question of whether the light of wisdom or the midday sun was brighter, the Buddha shifted the conversation to an important topic: the path to happiness. Wisdom should not be used only in the present to create happiness, which is a human desire. Happiness relates to the present, not to some distant realm after death. The Buddha asked Upadasi, "What is the only path that leads to happiness?" Upadasi replied, "My master taught that one must abstain from killing, not engage in theft, avoid adultery, refrain from lying, and practice asceticism." These 5 ethical principles were advocated by ascetics at the time. The first 4 ethical principles align with the Buddha's teachings in concept, but differ in content. Regarding abstaining from killing, the target of ascetic teachings was human beings, not encompassing the broader and more positive meaning of promoting and building peace. Some animals can engage in instinctual wars, but these wars are for survival and resources, unlike the calculated wars humans wage that can annihilate entire species. International or ideological wars often stem from disrespecting sovereignty and related issues. Therefore, the Buddha taught that alongside maintaining ethical conduct, one must build peace. In addition to abstaining from killing, one should practice freeing and creating life and harmoniously building the environment. Second, besides not stealing, one should practice charity, generosity, and helping others. Not stealing should be coupled with charitable actions. Third, not only should one uphold monogamy, but also encourage others to do the same and create opportunities for such conduct to flourish. Fourth, alongside not lying, one should practice proclaiming the truth, speaking words that rebuild harmony from destruction, and saying things beneficial to society and the community. We can see that the content far exceeds the basic moral principles. These 4 ethical principles align in identifying what is evil, but differ significantly in promoting and guiding toward what is good. Other religious and ethical teachings do not emphasize this construction of good as much. The 5th difference is that asceticism as a path to ultimate happiness is not endorsed by the Buddha. The Buddha, having been a victim of this practice, did not rush to analyze this for Upadasi. The Buddha continued, "Can practicing these 5 ethical principles lead to genuine happiness, or is it a mix of suffering and joy?" After some thought, Upadasi replied, "I believe it is not pure happiness but a mixture of suffering and joy." This is a very accurate observation. By not committing the 4 evil deeds of killing, stealing, adultery, and lying, we naturally feel joy from not being punished by the law, cursed, or tormented by our conscience. This joy is natural, but we must consider the 5th principle, asceticism. Indeed, having full faculties but not enjoying them positively, ethically, and for mutual joy renders them pointless. Ascetics experience suffering but console themselves that enduring this suffering will bring eternal happiness, which is a flawed understanding of karma. The profound lesson is that the Buddha suggests we must think for ourselves to arrive at the truth. If the Buddha outright declared this method wrong, Upadasi might not believe him. Therefore, he led Upadasi to his own conclusions. Only when we earnestly and honestly reflect on knowledge can we truly awaken, being reborn with wisdom. The Buddha stated that the true path to happiness does not end with avoiding evil, but must also include sowing seeds of goodness. Several discourses in the middle-length discourses describe the path to happiness in Buddhism as having 3 aspects: completely avoiding evil, absolutely building goodness, and purifying the mind through training one's motives and attitudes when practicing goodness. If good deeds are done with the motive of seeking fame or out of obligation, the heart is not noble. Even if the good deed is accomplished, its social value remains low. The ascetic path only achieves the first aspect of avoiding evil, but does not address doing good. They perceive doing good as self-mortification, thus failing to purify the mind. When the mind suffers because of bodily suffering, how can one find joy? This spiritual method is entirely ineffective. The path to happiness. The Buddha said, the reasonable path leading to happiness is the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd jhanas. Here, the Buddha used the relative term, reasonable path, rather than saying that practicing the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd jhanas is equivalent to and identical with happiness. Recently, a Buddhist shared with us that she had been possessed by a spirit for nearly 20 years. She believed it was a benevolent spirit that could bring her happiness, so she accepted its presence for decades. It instructed her to chant sutras, meditate, and stop at its command. We asked, if it is a benevolent spirit, why did it tell you to stop chanting and meditating? She replied, because during conversations the spirit said, as long as you meditate, chant sutras, and practice, you are still disturbed. You must practice to the point of no thoughts, no practice, no attainment. This frightened her into abandoning everything. The spiritual nourishment she received daily for happiness was discarded due to an imagined illness directed by a spirit. It took us nearly 2 hours to help her realize she was in a delusional state. Therefore, the Buddha spoke very relatively, and this relativity is the truth. Because the nature of the universe is dependent origination, everything is relative. Hence, the Buddha used the phrase, this may be a reasonable path. Reasonable and leading to are 2 conditions. First, it must align with the truth as it unfolds. Second, it must have the potential to lead there. If these 2 factors are not fulfilled, then even if we practice, we will not achieve results. Thus, method and condition cannot be separated. The outcome of any practice must depend on the method. Without method, even if we are in a temple for decades, we remain stagnant, or worse, our ego grows. Without wisdom, the ego grows rapidly. The more achievements, the larger the ego. The 1st jhana is the detachment from sensual pleasures and unwholesome states. Sensual pleasure, particularly sexual desire and simple physical desires, foster greed and ignorance. Wherever there is desire, there is ignorance, conservatism, and usurpation leading to anger. When greed, anger, and ignorance coexist, suffering arises. Unwholesome states include actions, speech, and thoughts. To attain the 1st jhana, a practitioner must first cease evil, do good, and transform sexual energy. The 2nd jhana is the cessation of applied and sustained thought. This involves using a wholesome object as a focus for the mind to temporarily forget worries, overcome pain, and not cling to negative things, aiming towards a positive spiritual path. This is a necessary reaction, a substitution method, like a wedge to stabilize the mind, calming it, making it light and relaxed. This process of bliss occurs as we practice with a single object. In Buddhist scriptures, many objects can be relied upon, such as loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, non-greed, non-anger, non-ignorance, essentially ethical values for contemplation, helping to overcome sorrow. Alternatively, one can rely on the light, space, or elements like earth, water, fire, and wind. Whatever suits one's preference and ability becomes a tool and condition to achieve stillness, overcoming pain. Using this formula, Chinese Zen masters created koans after transformative enlightenment for a student, which were then applied to various situations with similar results. Initial dialogues without historical basis were used according to the tendencies and capabilities of the Zen masters to help students break their attachments. If a koan proves highly effective and widely used, it becomes an established koan. Thus, all initial dialogues are the beginning of a koan, and koans or initial dialogues are just tools of applied and sustained thought, focusing on a particular object. Breathing, smiling, contemplating the name of Buddha Amitabha, or chanting mantras in Vajrayana have similar values. These act as wedges to stabilize the mind, preventing disturbances and illusions. With this practice, the practitioner progresses from the first jhana to the second. The definition of the second jhana is the cessation of applied and sustained thought as tools, meaning after successfully borrowing them, we must discard them. Like scaffolding for a two-story house, once the house is built, the scaffolding must be removed. Tools need to be transcended. The methods used must be let go. The Diamond Sutra states, even the correct teaching must be abandoned, let alone incorrect teachings. Incorrect teachings include wrong, unwholesome, unethical, contentious, and more, which should naturally be abandoned. The correct teachings also need to be abandoned, which can be puzzling if not understood in context. Using the correct teachings as a raft to cross a river becomes pointless if carried on the head out of gratitude. It must be let go after crossing. One should let go of methods, returning them to the suffering side for others to use. Clinging to them shows a lack of intellectual generosity. Chinese people often fall into this intellectual stinginess. Family inheritance of knowledge is a form of this stinginess. Therefore, applied and sustained thoughts as tools for establishing peace of mind must be abandoned to reside in the second jhana. The third jhana is the abandonment of initial joy and subtle bliss. We must let go of the initial joy, though it starts as light and comfortable in the first and second jhanas. Only then can we achieve subtle bliss, akin to ascending to the third floor and turning away from the first and second floors. Letting go of the lower joys enables reaching higher jhanas. Here, the Buddha modestly and relatively states, these may be reasonable paths leading to happiness. The fourth jhana, equanimity and purity of mindfulness, is the core goal the Buddha aimed for. The Buddha asked the ascetics and followers of Upadasi present, "Do you have any opinions?" They unanimously responded, "We know nothing beyond what our master present here has taught, and what he says represents our thoughts." Monotheistic religious paths often reflect this. The student's knowledge is a copy of the teacher's, without daring to question anything, even methodically or rationally. They rarely invent anything new. The Buddha turned to Upadasi, who shook his head and asked, "What then is the path to true happiness if you say the first, second, and third jhanas are just reasonable methods?" The Buddha replied, "One must dwell in the fourth jhana. Achieving this and living among those who have attained it brings true happiness. The third jhana, subtle bliss, is not the highest happiness because it exists only during meditation. The formula of the fourth jhana has two parts: equanimity and purity of mindfulness. Equanimity means letting go of the objects of happiness and suffering, or being neutral between them. In meditation, holding on to happiness and letting go of suffering is necessary. Without holding on to happiness, suffering cannot be let go. But it is a mistake to hold on to happiness after letting go of suffering, as this is conditional happiness, opposing suffering, not true happiness. Therefore, we must let go of thoughts, as attachment hinders progress. When attachment ceases, absolute purity of mind is achieved. The mind transforms into wisdom, shedding all attachments, allowing one to master emotions, perceptions, and self. The Buddha taught, when one lets go of thoughts and attains purity, it exists not only during meditation but everywhere, highlighting this goal. Reaching the fourth jhana with equanimity and purity means living in true happiness, not merely experiencing an illusion of happiness. Like a banker counting money is experiencing the illusion of wealth, or one hearing descriptions of food but not actually eating, the person gains no real satisfaction. The Buddha shared with Upadasi that achieving the fourth jhana is great happiness for lay people. But he affirmed true monastics on the Buddhist spiritual path do not aim just to attain the fourth jhana, but have higher goals. The Buddha clearly outlined these goals: recollection of past lives, understanding of birth and death, and the destruction of mental defilements. These three are known as the threefold knowledge. Recollection of past lives is the wisdom of past experiences, providing empirical evidence and lessons for the present and future to avoid repeating mistakes. It opens the door to non-errancy and repentance. The divine eye is the wisdom to see others' karma, reaffirming the deeper understanding of future karma. While personal karma is known through recollection of past lives, others' future karma is seen through the divine eye. Thus, possessing these two wisdoms provides complete knowledge of personal and others' karma. The destruction of mental defilements is the wisdom to see clearly that defilements, karmic obstacles, and impurities like greed, anger, ignorance, and selfish ego have no place. This is the ultimate result for a spiritual practitioner in Buddhism. These three goals are why people become monks, not for reverence, praise, or positions in a temple or religious community. Achieving the threefold knowledge leads to the wisdom of the Four Noble Truths, liberating from the floods of sensual desire, rebirth, and ignorance. The Buddha used the impactful metaphor of a flood to convey the overwhelming nature of these defilements. Therefore, the fundamental and most crucial goal for Buddhist practitioners is to attain the threefold knowledge to end all life's suffering. Moreover, post-attainment conduct is based on the wisdom of the Four Noble Truths, ensuring no errors or repetitions in actions. Obstacles and realities. After listening to the Buddha's teachings, the spiritual teacher Upadasi felt admiration for the insights he had heard for the first time. Being an honest seeker of true spiritual knowledge, he objectively assessed the teachings without letting past prejudices influence him. Thus, he wished to become a disciple of the Buddha and sought to become a genuine monk. According to tradition, anyone who had been a priest of another religion had to undergo a period of faith-testing practice. But in this case, the Buddha immediately accepted Upadasi, knowing that he approached Buddhism with a sincere quest for truth and not for illusionary fame or status. When the Buddha accepted Upadasi as a monastic disciple, his ascetic and lay disciples were furious. They said, "Venerable Upadasi is like a pierced water jar that cannot hold a single drop of water. He is the empty one, not our teacher." Hearing such strong opposition, Upadasi lost the opportunity to become a monastic disciple of the Buddha, even though the Buddha was ready to accept him. Limited by their understanding and knowledge, sometimes our loved ones, out of affection and the desire to protect us, end up harming us by preventing us from accessing higher values because they fear losing us. Upadasi had hundreds of thousands of disciples, yet he felt no shame in acknowledging the Buddha as his teacher, recognizing the Buddha's true spiritual nature. He also wished for his disciples to follow the Buddha. However, their strong reaction caused him to waver. Ultimately, he lived with the truth but did not become a part of it, maintaining his old spiritual tradition despite having been enlightened. Living with loved ones like Upadasi's disciples can cause suffering. Out of love, they protect us, fearing to lose us. Relationships built on gain and loss bind people together, leading to a situation where the blind lead the blind. It's like not knowing how to row a boat. The more you struggle, the more the boat stays in place or goes in circles, resulting in no progress despite the effort. Many questions arise during retreats. I want to go to the temple, but my spouse doesn't agree because they fear losing me. Another scenario, I want to do charity, but my husband and father don't allow it, saying it's foolish and encourages laziness in others. This reasoning, though seemingly appealing, is misplaced. While some may exploit charity, others might need timely support to avoid despair and death caused by natural disasters. In impermanence, love remains. When everything else is lost, love is established. Natural disasters like tsunamis and earthquakes teach us love amidst collective mourning, often unacknowledged. Such tragedies provide opportunities to strengthen love, not as a result of praying for misfortune, but as a natural response. If we don't know how to love correctly, we may hinder our loved ones' happiness and joy. Visiting temples and practicing good deeds should not be feared. Excessive worry can unintentionally imprison our loved ones in emotional shackles. When seeing loved ones engaging in good deeds, some people lament, "Oh no, she's being so foolish, giving all her money away." Such negative thinking and comments create fear and prevent commitment. Or one might hear, "Practicing for merits is ordinary. True practice is about non-practice, non-attainment, and non-thought." Without achieving preliminary merits in practice, how can one attain non-attainment? Practice diligently first, then discard past achievements to attain the ultimate goal. Ambition for non-attachment without prior accomplishments is futile. Huineng's verses in the Platform Sutra can be a double-edged sword, leading to confusion if misapplied. Bodhi is fundamentally without any tree. The bright mirror is also not a stand. Originally, there is not a single thing where can dust alight. Such teachings are for those with significant spiritual attainment. For those on the path, effort and achievements are necessary before discarding them for ultimate realization. Shen Shu's verses are for beginners, while Huineng's are for advanced practitioners. Using Huineng's teaching prematurely results in no merits, as nothing is done to generate them. Therefore, applying sutra teachings appropriately is crucial. Overusing spiritual intensity is like overdosing on medicine, ineffective after overuse. Similarly, spirituality should match one's capacity to avoid hindering growth. Loving and guiding loved ones correctly helps them achieve their worth. Misguided protection, like Upadasi's disciples, can lead to their downfall. Many face such situations in society. It's regrettable when a knowledgeable and honest spiritual teacher like Upadasi is swayed. Though not mentioned in the scriptures, there might be some regret in his thoughts. Being a teacher to many, now becoming a disciple seems wasteful. In reality, Upadasi lived the Buddha's new spiritual path, but couldn't openly admit it, hindered by his followers' opinions, leading to internal conflict and missed opportunities.